Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Let's start tonight with a question. Did America vote in 2024 to immediately halt federal efforts at veterans suicide prevention? Do you remember, veteran suicide prevention being litigated in the debates? Do you remember Donald Trump campaigning on stopping federal efforts on veteran suicide prevention? Of course not. And yet that seems to be what he tried to do today. Now, last week, we brought you the news that tons of researchers at the National Institutes of Health had been unilaterally paused in their activities. Research on cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, grant funding, study sessions, even some trials, it appears, all just immediately frozen, put on hold without explanation. Why? Well, honestly, it's still not entirely clear. Now comes this document from the Office of Management and Budget, that's the sort of White House's budgeting arm, last night, that has effectively ordered unilateral freezes, just immediate unilateral freezes on federal grant spending. This is a scheme straight out of Project 2025. The two-page memo demands those spending freezes because, and I am quoting here, the use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve. Now, a bunch of people took them to court, and this afternoon a federal judge temporarily put those spending freezes, which could total into the trillions of dollars, on hold, but just until arguments next week. But just to be clear, today was spent with people in every state of this country, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, all trying to figure out what was going to happen because this has enormous real-world consequences. As the Washington Post put it, hours after the Trump administration announced a sweeping freeze on federal spending, the U.S. government fell into chaos Tuesday as officials braced for potential interruptions to programs that promote food safety, combat crime, provide college aid, produce medical research, and respond to natural disasters. As far as we can tell, and again, it's a little unclear, they just by fiat ordered huge swaths of congressionally appropriated funding signed by a president to halt. Again, the scope of this order still unclear. Get this, according to Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, access to the Medicaid services portal that the states use to interact with the payment system and Medicaid went down in all 50 states today. Okay? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars here. We're talking about 80 million Americans who use Medicaid for some of the most vulnerable of our population, but also broadly used. And the portal for the payment system that the states use just went down. No one explained why. Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost of Florida noted this afternoon, just got off the phone with a medical provider who accepts Medicaid. Because they are shut out from the Medicaid portal, they might not be able to make payroll. They exclusively serve low-income Floridians. Again, this is the payment portal system for Medicaid. 80 million people, hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, the White House took so much heat for this one, they are apparently blaming it on a glitch. Quote, the White House is aware of the Medicaid website portal outage. We expect the portal will be back online shortly. Okay, access now seems to be restored. But did you do it on purpose or not? Was it just an accident? Everyone got cut out of the Medicaid portal when you froze all the funding? I'm not sure anyone in the White House actually knows what they're doing here. Yesterday, they said the funding freeze was for programs including but not limited to, again, I'm quoting their text here, including but not limited to those affected by Trump's executive orders targeting so-called DEI programs, really anti-discrimination programs, and other spending Trump has deemed woke. Today, they said the freeze is expressly limited to those programs. See the contradiction there? Very confusing. But here's what's clear. They're messing with people's actual lives. As Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland warns, federal grants to help veterans in rural areas access health care and grants to help veterans get other critical services, including suicide prevention resources, transition assistance, and housing for homeless veterans, will be cut off if these budget freezes are implemented broadly. The list of what could be impacted, again, there's a lot of money that flows through federal governments into grants. The list of what could be impacted includes grants for, get this, National Center for Missing Exploited Children, grants to prevent domestic violence against women, grants for the Meals on Wheels program that feeds elderly folks, grants for early childhood education, grants for funding the police and fire departments. What are we doing here? What is all this for? Well, it's to destroy the constitutional order of checks and balances enacted by the founders and then reformed, improved, and reinforced throughout the last 250 years. And this is not my view. This is Russ Vought, we're going to talk about in a second, who talks about a post-constitutional order, okay? The constitutional order we have now supports a federal government that is supposed to serve the public good and not just solely the moment-to-moment corrupt whims of whoever is currently serving as president. Trump and the Trump administration is carrying out in almost every quadrant a complete assault on that order for the glory of Donald Trump, so he can impose his will against the people.
This is an immediate crisis for our kids, for public safety, for our seniors, for our healthcare system. And why? Because Donald Trump is trying to seize power. That is what is happening. Guess where Donald Trump is going to decide to unfreeze federal grants? To the companies run by his billionaire friends, to the states and congressional districts run by members of Congress or governors that are loyal to him. All of a sudden, we transition from a democracy to a monarchy, because that's what a king does, uses the money in the treasury to reward his friends and to punish his enemies.
And to be crystal clear here, I mean, this order, these actions taken, what Trump is trying to do, just fly in the face of absolutely foundational bedrock constitutional principles. The founders were clear as day, Article 1, that Congress, not the president, has the power of the purse, that it decides how money is to be spent. Now, it is currently the position of the Trump administration, they've been vocal about this, they've written it down and whatnot, that the president instead can unilaterally, at his whim, decide, no, I don't care. We won't spend the money you appropriated. We get to decide what gets spent regardless of what Congress says. That is the current position of the White House. And the guy that Trump wants to run the Office of Management and Budget, that dude, the guy I was talking about before, that's the department behind these spending freezes, Russell Vought. He has called the law regulating what spending the White House can block unconstitutional. Now, Vought, you may remember, happens to be one of the chief architects of Project 2025, right? And he was caught on camera saying Trump is going to deny this, but of course he's going to do Project 2025. By the way, Project 2025 outlined basically this entire plan. It called for the Republican president to act unilaterally to, quote, bring the administrative state to heel. So Donald Trump blatantly lied about his knowledge of and connection to Project 2025 and the campaign trail. It was polling at like 10%. And you're seeing today why, right? Freezing veteran suicide prevention programs. But now he's just trying to force it down the throats of the American people. So I guess if Trump wants to halt funding for veteran suicide prevention programs that these sycophants in the Republican Party think he should just be able to, the ones who are in Congress, who should want to control appropriations of the power of the purse because they're in Congress. Look, everything they've done the first few weeks here, week and a half, could not be clearer. They're just going to try and do all this through essentially sheer force of will. The question is, will people stand for this? For instance, are Democrats going to vote to confirm Russell Vought, who as of now is set to be voted out from committee this Thursday? Are the Republicans on the committee going to get calls from their constituents? Will people flood the offices of senators and their voice boxes with phone calls opposing Russell Vought's confirmation in states red and blue, saying, no, we want the constitutional order, not the post-constitutional order he's advocating, in which Russell Vought and Donald Trump unilaterally get to decide that Meals on Wheels is frozen? Will Democrats in Congress, in both houses, throw themselves across the tracks of what is obviously both an illegal and unconstitutional power grab, and also the most chaotically spiteful madness I think I've ever seen a federal office holder undertake? Right now, there are stories running in every local market in this country about how this freeze would affect needed programs. Public opinion didn't disappear when Donald Trump got elected by 1.5 points or more. What happens next is going to be determined what people do in response.
Donald Trump's reckless action cut off funding to law enforcement, farmers, schools, childcare, veterans, and health care. While he was out golfing, he threw the country into crisis. This is not bold. It's not leadership. It's stupid, buffoonish, childish of exactly what they did. Most folks were up all night last night as we dealt with this being thrown on there with no guidance. I know you have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions because not one damn person thought this through. I'm hearing within the last few minutes, oh, no, the Medicare thing was just a fluke. It's unrelated to this. That is there is absolutely no way they didn't know exactly what they were doing.
Minnesota Governor and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz speaking this afternoon in Minnesota in response to the Trump White House's sudden, inexplicable freeze on all federal funding. Governor Walz and state officials were sent scrambling overnight to try to deal with the expected impact of roughly $2 billion in federal funding for ongoing programs being yanked instantly and with no warning. Today, after a huge pushback across the country, the Trump administration tried to take some of it back and say they hadn't meant it. Then the freeze overall was put on hold by a federal judge. Joining us now exclusively for his first interview since the presidential election is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Governor Walz, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for making time to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you, Rachel. And great first segment, terrifying but accurate. You know what they're after, and it's not that we should be surprised by this. They laid it out in Project 2025, so here we are.
Well, actually, let me ask you about that on this point. A lot of people have been today and the last few days crediting your campaign and crediting all the reporting during the campaign that identified Project 2025 as essentially what looked like a blueprint for the incoming Trump administration to dismantle the American government. They denied it. They said they had nothing to do with it, said they'd never heard of it. Does it seem to you like that's actually what they're doing?
Oh, it is. It doesn't seem it is. We took it seriously, and I can tell your viewers tonight, governors and attorney generals took this seriously, and there was a lot of planning. There's a lot of good folks, smart folks, organizations. You talked about some of them that were out there preparing for this. But there's only so much planning you can do because of the impact it makes. And just today I was at a Head Start program. What we have to do is we have to personalize this down to this matters to each person, because Republicans always want to talk about cutting government. That's in theoretically. They never want to be specific because we know that these programs are incredibly popular. But I can tell folks we were preparing for it. They wrote it out. If you go back and look at that now, you'll see this go step by step. And I would say, Rachel, that it was cruel. They planned it. Yes, it was somewhat buffoonish, but I'm not quite certain that we're reading that right. I think this is a case of that this is a trial balloon to see how much tolerance we had and what we pull back. I make this analogy. It's like you caught someone and they stole everything out of your house. You caught them and you told them to put it back. And when you start looking, some of it's still gone. What they're going to see is, oh, they didn't raise a stink about meteorologists or our folks who are monitoring PFAS in our water, so let's just go on with that. Or people that we don't think have a voice that we want to marginalize and demonize. So they were going to get this. And I heard Chris on his program talking with Jamie Raskin, who is the smartest person you'll find in Congress. They're never going to bring this the legal way because no Republican will vote for this. And the deafening silence of Republican governors, these are my colleagues. Some of them are my friends, but shame on you. You know what this is doing. And look, I come from a wealthy state that has the lowest childhood poverty rates, and we have a strong safety net. I guarantee you these Republican states would pay the price far more than us, and they're just silent on it. So we're going to need some courage. This is a long fight. This is ideologically everything you laid out. They want to destroy the federal government, this buyout of employees, because now they threaten them. It's here. The game is here. We knew it was coming. I don't know what people thought, that we were just speaking, that this wasn't going to happen. Donald Trump said, oh, I never heard of him. And now you got this guy Vogt, that's at the heart of it. So, look, it's on. I'm glad you said that. Governors are out there. The resistance is strong. You felt it. Americans, lo and behold, like democracy and feeding their children. So they're going to fight for these things. But here's what there's a court order. Who believes Donald Trump's going to care what the courts say? Who believes he's not going to do this? We're still finding glitches in our things. We're trying to access these system again. They're not functioning correctly. And the ludicrousness, the insult to the American public to tell us that for the first time it was just a coincidence that the Medicaid reimbursement site glitched at the same time they froze all these programs. We have to put an end to that. We have to just say, no, it's not enough. And I got to tell you, I'm sending it out to those Republican governors. We sat side by side. Governors don't. We have to deliver. We have to make sure that the water runs, that things are happening, and they're getting hammered just as much as we are.
What do you think? America's listening to you right now, thinking about what might have been had you been vice president instead of J.D. Vance, what might have been had Kamala Harris been the president right now instead of Donald Trump. People hearing you talking about the pushback and the fight and that mattering. What does that mean in practical terms? The average person watching you right now who agrees that this needs a big pushback, what should they do?
Yeah, and you know that overused term, the frog in the boiling water, we've been in the damn pot way too long. I think it is speaking up. It's thinking about your neighbors. It's writing and putting those members of Congress. Look, there is no spine amongst those folks, but this is real. This is, they're talking about defunding the police, things that they, puff their chests up and say they're good with, making the case. And I would let, to the voters, I'm with this too. Everybody's fatigued. Trust me, I get it. It was pure hell, and the disappointment and the frustration. And I'm, soul searching. What could we have done to make the case? Because we knew this was coming. We knew that the implications, and they're throwing so much at us that we're fatigued. We spent 3 days, having them trying to debate that President Musk gave a Nazi salute. Of course he did. But that is a distraction from what I think you said it. This is game on stuff right here. And I am worried with these federal employees because, look, they're in a tough spot. That some of these folks, especially those that are doing good work around environmental concerns, around justice for people, around, criminal justice reform, all of the things that make our society better, those folks are in there. And they're making, they put out tweets from the president's fail son who threatens people, like, we're coming for you. You think this is bad or whatever. So I would tell people, stay focused. Don't take the bait on the distractions. Surround yourself with people who understand this and recognize the things they went after today are basically a big chunk of what society does. And people like to have clean water and hospitals and safety and roads and airports, all the things they're going after. And you summed it up. There's societies that function like this, where the rich and the oligarchs do everything, and there's some fabulously wealthy people who are are above the law, and the rest of us are here. And I think we have to find that voice. We have to push back. We have to be organized. We do have to use the courts, but I just want to caution everyone. I don't know what tends us to believe that Donald Trump cares what the courts say. I think there needs to be more to that. And I think it is taking it to the individual people. Show what each of these programs does and what it means to people's lives.
Yeah, no matter what people motivated anybody's vote, if you didn't think you were voting to cut firefighting, if you didn't think you were voting to cut meat inspections, if you didn't think you were voting to cut air traffic control, well, it's all becoming very, very clear right now. Sir,
Yep.
Please come back anytime. It's nice to see you, and it's an honor to have you here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Democratic-led states are taking the fight to the administration over Donald Trump's attempt to freeze trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans that Congress passed to send to the states. A coalition of 23 state attorneys general, led by New York's Letitia James, have sued to block the freeze. New York Attorney General Letitia James joins me now. And General James, thank you so much for being here. Tell me about this lawsuit. New York and California are leading it. It's 23 states and cities total. What are you looking to have happen?
So thank you for having me, Joy. Not only is it California, but it's Rhode Island, it's Massachusetts, it's New Jersey, it's Rhode Island, and it's the state of New York, which is leading this matter. What we are seeking, obviously, is a temporary restraining order and then a preliminary injunction against this illegal act. It is ultra-virus. It exceeds the authority of the President of the United States. It's in violation of the spending clause. So the United States Congress has control of the purse, and so this President of the United States cannot disrespect a co-equal branch of government with the stroke of a pen. And it's important that individuals understand that a number of states, their portals were frozen today. Here in the state of New York, our Medicaid portal was closed off. There was a state in Arizona, Attorney General Mays indicated that, in fact, just last night, She had seized over 500,000 pounds of methamphetamines, and that drug program, that interdiction program, that could have been affected. Law enforcement grants, food for seniors, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, aid to farmers, aid to pregnant women, aid to children. The list goes on and on and on. It is unprecedented, unparalleled, but basically illegal, unconstitutional, reckless, and dangerous.
And, you know, it seems that that Donald Trump is testing federalism itself and attempting to seize for himself and for his administration powers, as you point out, that were in the Constitution designated to Congress, and then sort of doing the same thing in sort of launching what feels like almost an invasion of these states with ICE agents on the streets of American cities. We know that New York City joined the list of cities where these performative raids are taking place, sometimes with celebrity podcasters joining along, Dr. Phil there on hand. It's almost as if they're doing it like a reality show. What protections can the Attorney General's office offer to the people of New York in this case?
It's chaos, confusion, and it's conflict, but basically it's fear. And what it's having is a chilling effect on undocumented and immigrants here in the great state of New York. We are monitoring this situation. It is my understanding that ICE was in New York City, in parts of Westchester, and in the Bronx today. But they were focusing on dangerous individuals. And obviously, we support their efforts in that regard. But when it comes to individuals who cannot go to school, children who cannot go to school, individuals who are victims and witnesses to crime who are afraid to go into courthouses, individuals who are victims of domestic violence and cannot get orders of protection because they're afraid to go into court, individuals who cannot go see their doctors. That is what is happening. I cannot tell you, Joy, the number of individuals who've come up to me crying because they are concerned about our government, who are concerned about being deported for doing absolutely nothing. Individuals who have been in this country and who have contributed to our economy, individuals who work each and every day, who know no other country but the United States, individuals that are fleeing dangerous situations, fleeing violence in their country, who only come here because they want the same thing that you and I want, and that is to make sure that our family is safe and to contribute to these United States. And it's unfortunate that I have to hold countless number of individuals in my arms crying because we have a government right now that is reckless.
Reckless and also, I mean, as I've said, performative. I mean, I want to show you an image of Kristi Noem, who was just confirmed, the former governor who was confirmed as a Department of Homeland Security. I mean, it's as she's cosplaying. It's almost a game where she seems to be cosplaying, as I'm not sure what she thinks that she's portraying here. She might as well be at Comic-Con looking like this. And it feels like the attempt, as you said, is to instill fear, not really to enforce the law. You can't say you're going after individuals who are just dangerous criminals if you are invading schools, because elementary and high school kids cannot be what you're talking about.
And again, in Newark, New Jersey, as you know, they also detained an American citizen who was a veteran. It is performative theater, and it's nothing more than shock and awe. But at the same time, it's, again, stoking fear in countless families across countless municipalities and across states. And individuals need to understand that immigrants and undocumented individuals contribute so much to our economy, so much to innovation and creativity, to business. And this is a nation of immigrants that President Kennedy once said. And it's important that we understand and respect them and recognize that they, too, have rights. And that's why, as the Attorney General of the great state of New York, we've issued advisories. We've held meetings with clergy. We have held meetings with advocacy groups and with business leaders, again, who are concerned about the attacks on our democracy, attack on the rule of law, and attacks against citizens who want nothing more than to live in peace and to contribute to the economy of the United States of America.
The irony, of course, for Donald Trump in particular, is that the state of New York is the state that made him a felon because he was duly convicted by a jury of his peers in the hush money case. But there were two civil judgments that, in cases that your office brought, Madam Attorney General, that includes the fraud case in which Donald Trump was found to have serially defrauded the state of New York. He still owes the state of New York some $500 million senators. And then, of course, there was the civil case that E. Jean Carroll brought for defamation and for sexual abuse, in which he was also convicted by jury of his peers, found liable for sexual abuse, in which he owes E. Jean Carroll. He is now attempting to claim, as somebody who's supposedly about law and order, that the law and order that was dispensed by New York juries do not apply to him, and stating that his immunity that the Supreme Court gave him extends to the E. Jean Carroll case, and presumably that he doesn't have to pay the state of New York. Can the state of New York force him to live under the law?
So again, in my case, we are waiting for a decision from the appellate division in the Second Circuit. And it's important to understand that all of the violations of law that he engaged in, including trying to take advantage of our insurance laws, our tax laws, and not paying adequately to our tax base, were done when he was not the president of the United States. And this is a civil matter. It is not criminal. And so the pardon law does not apply in this particular case. And so we are awaiting a decision. And upon that decision, we suspect that he will probably appeal that decision to the highest court in the state of New York, the Court of Appeals. But we are confident at the end of the day that he will be held accountable to the residents and to the taxpayers of the great state of New York, because only one rule should apply, and should apply to all of us equally, regardless of whether or not you sit in the highest office of these United States.
New York Attorney General Letitia James, thank you very much.
John mentioned more than a dozen officials who worked on special counsel Jack Smith's team, which investigated Trump's handling of classified documents along with his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, have now been fired by the Justice Department. In a statement to NBC News, a Justice Department official said, quote, "The acting attorney general does not trust these officials to assist in faithfully implementing the president's agenda. This action is consistent with the mission of ending the weaponization of government." Meanwhile, the acting U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. is launching an internal review of the department's Capitol riot prosecutions. Ed Martin made the announcement in an email to Justice Department colleagues. Before he joined the Trump administration, Martin was a Stop the Steal advocate who spread conspiracy theories about the attack on the Capitol and represented at least 3 January 6 defendants. Martin also spoke at the Capitol on January 5th and was on the grounds during the riot itself. He was tweeting. As the mob was breaching the building, Martin tweeted, "Like Mardi Gras in D.C. today. Love, faith, and joy. Ignore hashtag fake news." Okay. Joining us now, we have former FBI Assistant Director and former Legislative Counsel of the Department of Justice, Greg Brower. What is your take, Greg, on these latest moves?
Well, I guess I would say, Mika, first of all, they're unprecedented. That may be the simplest observation to make. Both the DOJ moves and the Inspector General firings are things that we've not seen before. With respect to the DOJ firings, these seem to be career-positioned people who do have certain rights and will likely appeal their dismissals. And so we are used to, as you know, a new administration coming in and changing all of the political appointees, both presidential appointees and those serving at that layer or two below them. But we've never seen anything like this. And we certainly haven't seen anything like this with respect to the IGs. So what I'm watching is the congressional reaction with respect to the IGs in particular. The IGs work for Congress. Senator Grassley and others have been big champions of the IG community. It's important that we have a robust IG corps. And so I suspect this is going to raise a lot of attention in Congress on both sides of the aisle. And that's what I'm looking for next.
So you mentioned the IG firings. In a questionable legal move on Friday, President Trump fired multiple independent inspectors general from the Defense, State, Labor, and Health and Human Services departments, among others. Now, Trump defended his actions Saturday, saying, quote, "I did it because it's a very common thing to do. I don't know them, but some people thought that some were unfair or were not doing the job." Despite that explanation, the legal justification stands on shaky ground. A law passed in Congress in 2022 requires a 30-day notification from the White House to Congress should they choose to let go of an inspector general. The White House must also give Congress substantive reasoning for the firing. Greg, you yourself were an inspector general for the U.S. Government Publishing Office from 2004 to 2007, and I'm curious your reaction to this news.
Well, as I said earlier, this really is unprecedented. It is, to be clear, the president's prerogative to remove IGs that he or a predecessor appointed. But as you point out, Mika, there is a 2022 law on the books that requires, in such situations, that notice and a reason be given by the president to Congress. That did not happen here. So, again, it will be very interesting to see what Senator Grassley and others in the Congress, and in fact, there is now an IG caucus in the Congress, bipartisan group of members who recognize the value of the IG community and have expressed a desire to support the IGs. It will be interesting to see how they respond to this. But it is not a normal thing to replace IGs like that. Certainly, no one would argue that the IGs have jobs for life. And again, the president does have the prerogative to replace them when appropriate. But this is unusual, and I'm looking to Senator Grassley and others to respond and to ensure that we do have an independent, robust, nonpartisan IG Corps working to help Congress with its oversight responsibilities.
Hi, Greg. It's Molly Jong-Fast. It's not just unusual. It's sort of beyond any scope in modern presidential history. Can you say more about that? And also, can you speak to who wasn't fired?
Well, I frankly had expected that President Trump, upon stepping in for a second term, may just fire all of the IGs that he did not appoint. And again, it would be his prerogative with due notice and explanation to Congress. But the group that we saw fired the other night didn't really fit that description. I believe a majority of them were actually appointed by President Trump previously. So to your point, Molly, yes, this is not the way transitions have normally worked. And although the president does have the prerogative to do so, these IGs serve arguably at the pleasure of the president. But again, it's a little different than most appointees who serve at the pleasure because of this 2022 law. But I really think it's up to Congress to react to this and to decide just how robust and how effective and how independent they want the IG Corps to be. Again, after all, the IGs work for Congress in doing oversight of the executive branch. And if Congress doesn't want them to be independent, well-funded, and effective, I guess that's Congress's prerogative. But that would be a major departure from the past.
Former FBI Assistant Director and former Legislative Counsel at the Justice Department, Greg Brower, thank you very much for your insights this morning. So,
yeah, Charlie, turning to Vaughn's reporting, does the president have the authority to freeze federal money already allocated by Congress?
Well, this funding has been authorized and appropriated by the Congress. It's the law. Now, I do believe that the president has some authorities to pause funding for cause. If there might be some issues, they could do that. But this is an across the board. It's almost like, I don't know if it's not an impoundment, but it just strikes me that the president is in serious legal peril over this one. As Vaughn just pointed out, I mean, Pell Grants, grants to states for transportation projects. Are hospitals going to receive their Medicaid funding? I don't know the answers to these questions. This is overly broad. I suspect the president is way out over his skis and is going to be sued over this one for sure. But if I'm a Republican appropriator, and I was, as was your brother, I mean, I would be incensed that monies that have been appropriated by the U.S. Congress are not going to be spent on the programs for which they have been intended by executive fiat. I mean, this is, I think this is really out of bounds. And people are there are going to be real consequences to people across the country and the world, for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, Valencia, just in the last couple of minutes, the top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, weighed in on Trump's move to freeze all this money. Let's listen to this.
This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous.
Valencia, is there anything Democrats can do about this?
Listen, I hope that Democrats, after Election Day when Trump won, that they looked at Project 2025 and said, what are we going to do to respond to this? Because all that we are talking about that happened in the last 24 hours or the last week is literally in that playbook. And the people that wrote that said they want to inflict harm and trauma on folks. And we are experiencing that. And so Democrats have to be very clear with the American people, not just people who vote Democratic, but the people who are going to be hurt by this, who may have voted for Donald Trump or stayed home, all people, that not only are these the problems, these are the solutions, and these are the people that we should trust in the next 2 years to fix them. I also think we need to be seeing some Democratic governors and state legislators and attorneys generals out here as well, talking about what they are going to do to protect the people in their states. This is an opportunity for Democrats to get on the offense, because the Republicans have shown us clearly that they're all going to ride with Donald Trump with this egregious plan to just really gut the foundations of our country and have low-income people and people of all backgrounds face the brunt of that. And so Democrats have an opportunity here, but we don't have that much time to communicate that, and hopefully that they're planning for that very soon.
And so, speaking of time, back to you, Charlie, on your comments that this proposal or this freeze is in serious legal peril. What does that peril possibly look like? And then, to Valencia's point, that a lot of this has to do with time. What does serious legal peril mean, and how long would that be before it takes effect?
Well, just like with the orders on immigration, I suspect states' attorneys general are going to begin filing lawsuits to try to recover money that is owed to their states and local government entities. That's probably a place to start. And I don't know if this order extends to, say, contractors. Are we going to pay military contractors? He's pausing federal funding. I'm not sure what this means. And I don't think anybody knows until people start getting denied payments for critical services. Students, have to process their student loan applications, and they have to have Pell Grants. I mean, what does this mean? I suspect, there are going to be all sorts of people who are impacted who are going to be seeking legal representation to collect the monies that have been enacted into law that they are owed.
Courtney, meanwhile, the president also signed 4 executive orders to address what he called military readiness. What are some of the changes in the orders?
Yeah, so a couple of these are not a huge surprise. They are ending diversity programs and initiatives within the Department of Defense. We were expecting that. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like, but we do expect it to be pretty widespread. Also, as you mentioned, ending service for transgender individuals. What's key here, Jose, is that also includes stopping medical treatment for dependents of service members across the board who need medical treatment for transgender care, transition care. That will also have sweeping effects. In addition to that, there was one that was kind of surprising and may be a little confusing to some of our viewers. President Trump signed an executive order establishing an Iron Dome for America. Now, that does not mean that there will be an Iron Dome like we see in Israel protecting the skies over America. Rather, that's sort of more of a concept, an idea that there would be this almost a force field over the United States protecting it. The difference is the U.S. needs protection from ballistic missiles and this new advanced hypersonic capability that countries like China have already been testing. Essentially, they have the ability to, or they're trying to get to acquire the ability to put a missile up in space. It can circle around the space over and over and over and then just drop out of the air anywhere in the United States, frankly, anywhere in the world that they want. It's very difficult to defend against. And basically what this order is saying is the Trump administration wants to accelerate efforts to build a space defense against that. Critics have been concerned about the idea of building something that, for all intents and purposes, is a weapon in space because it could lead to an arms race that could threaten U.S. civilian and military assets like satellites that are already up in space. Now, there's a period here where the U.S. has to come back and say, this is how we would establish this space-based defense architecture, what it would look like. But essentially realistically, what this could mean is the U.S. would have space-based weapons that would be able to take out missiles while they're in the space phase of the arc before they're able even to break back through the atmosphere and threaten the United States back on the ground. So it's called an Iron Dome for America, but it's, Jose, I got to tell you, it's really so much more. It's very different than the Iron Dome. The fourth and final, also not a surprise, executive order, because President Trump announced it at the inauguration. That is allowing service members who were separated from the military for refusing the COVID vaccine. They can now come back. That's already been in place since 2023. The difference here, Jose, they will now be eligible for years of back pay and be reinstated at the rank they were separated at. So, again, not hugely surprising executive orders, but as you mentioned, widespread impact across the U.S. military, Jose.
Courtney, that whole concept of the Iron Dome and the creation of it, or the start of the process for an Iron Dome as an executive order, kind of reminds me a little bit of what Reagan did with SDI, which was really an invention at the time. He didn't have the wherewithal to be able to produce that at the time, but it was used strategically at the Reykjavik meeting, the first Reykjavik meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev. But that also kind of came about as an executive order.
Yeah, exactly. And the big difference here, I think that they calling it Iron Dome for America is almost making it more accessible for everyone to understand. You can think of an Iron Dome, what that would mean for defending the United States skies, right? But it's really so much more than that. This is already something, by the way, that's been in development and under research for years, frankly, the idea of how the U.S. can defend against these very advanced hypersonic threats. But this seems to be a direct order from the President of the United States to accelerate those efforts. So we'll see exactly how fast they can go and whether, in fact, they can field this space-based defense.
Courtney Kube, it's always great seeing you. I thank you very much. Charlie, before I let you go, later this week, Tulsi Gabbard is going to be holding her confirmation hearings. You served in Congress at the same time as Tulsi Gabbard did, who President Trump nominated as Director of National Intelligence. When you were the chair of the Ethics Committee, you had a conversation, or a series of conversations, right, with her about that trip that she was planning to take to Syria in 2017?
Yeah, in January 2017, just after President Trump was elected, she had called me about asking for my approval for her to go to Syria. As fate would have it, I was on the Ethics Committee for 8 years, and my chairmanship had just ended within hours, actually. It was just before the new Congress was to be sworn in. And so I was not in the position to approve or disapprove her travel to Syria because it was privately funded. It would need the permission of the Ethics Committee. And I just said to her, hey, as your friend, Tulsi, because I know Tulsi, we're friends. I always enjoyed serving with her. And I said, hey, Tulsi, I'm not so sure this is a great idea, given the security considerations with, ISIS being on the march, al-Nusra Front. And also, of course, there are political and potentially propaganda issues with regard to the regime, the Assad regime. So that's how the conversation more or less ended. She obviously went, so she must have gotten approval somehow. But I was no longer chair, but I remember that conversation very vividly.
Yeah, and, it was going to be a privately funded trip. I guess that's not unusual either.
Correct.
And there have been members of Congress that have gone to all kinds of places, dictatorships and countries that exploit and destroy their own people. But I'm just wondering, do you think that in and of itself should disqualify her?
Well, look, people are going to challenge her credentials because of her statements about Russia. It's sometimes seemed to parrot Russian talking points. She was obviously too close to Assad for comfort for many. She has had all sorts of problems with various authorities for the intelligence agencies, and she has recently reversed herself on some of those authorities. So for all of these reasons, I think that she may have some real problems getting confirmed. She doesn't have a natural Republican constituency in the United States Senate.